The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of oiled leather and brass polish, smells that had no place in a subway station. When the train emerged, Kate had to blink several times to be sure she wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion. A single car rolled silently into the station, its exterior a gleaming combination of polished mahogany and brass that looked more suited to a museum than a working subway line. The number 13 was painted on its side in elegant gold leaf, the style reminiscent of the 1940s. The car came to a stop directly in front of her, brass fittings catching the flickering fluorescent lights. Through its windows, she could see plush leather seats and warm Art Deco lighting that made the rest of the station seem even grimier by comparison. With a soft hydraulic hiss, the doors slid open. A conductor stepped out, tall, notably well-groomed in a pristine vintage uniform, his face pleasant but somehow difficult to focus on directly. "Coming aboard?" the conductor asked, extending his hand in welcome. Kate hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct honed by years of ER work screamed that this was wrong, but exhaustion clouded her judgment, and something about the warm golden light seemed to pull at her, promising rest, promising peace. She started. "Long shift?" the conductor asked, his voice carrying just the right note of casual concern. "You look like you could use some rest, Kate. We have plenty of room." Kate found herself stepping forward, drawn by the warmth. The interior was unusually large for a subway car, the air heavy with the scent of leather and something else, something achingly familiar that she couldn't quite place. "How did you know my name?" she asked, her hand still tracing the semicolon on her wrist. "Oh, I make it my business to know all the late-night regulars," he said, but something in his tone suggested more. "Healthcare workers especially. Such demanding hours." He paused, then added almost offhandedly, "Also, it's on your ID badge." The conductor's pleasant expression never wavered, but his eyes seemed to hold vast depths. "Where does this train go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Wherever you need it to," he replied simply. The worn vinyl bench of an ordinary subway car wouldn't have beckoned her like this, but the plush leather seats of car 13 seemed to promise the rest she desperately needed. Kate sank into the nearest one. The comforting leather was soft and warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight despite the midnight hour. The doors closed with a gentle hiss, so different from the harsh clang of modern trains. As they began to move, Kate noticed there was no rattling, no screech of metal on metal, just a gentle sway, like being rocked to sleep. Through the windows, the station's harsh fluorescent lighting gave way to something softer, more golden. Tunnel walls flickered past, but they seemed different somehow. Older brickwork, brass fixtures that hadn't been there before. "Tea?" The conductor appeared beside her, holding out a delicate china cup. The liquid inside steamed invitingly, smelling of chamomile and honey, exactly how her mother used to make it when Kate was sick as a child. Thank you," Kate said, accepting the cup, "but how did you—" "Sugar or honey? Though you've always preferred honey, haven't you? More medicinal." He smiled that pleasant, unsettling smile again. "We try to accommodate our passengers' preferences." Kate stared into the tea, watching the steam rise. "This is impossible. This whole train is impossible." "Impossible?" The conductor raised an eyebrow. "In your line of work, Nurse Sullivan, you've seen people survive the impossible quite regularly. That young man tonight, for instance, his chances weren't good, were they? But here he is alive because of you." Kate's head snapped up. "I never mentioned—" "There is always a young man." The conductor moved on, making his way down the car. Other passengers sat in the shadowy far end. Had they been there before? She couldn't quite make out their faces in the golden light. Through the windows now, the tunnel walls seemed to melt away, replaced by shifting visions like reflections in dark water. She saw herself in the trauma bay, moving with practiced efficiency, yet somehow she was watching from every angle at once. The scenes played out like memories, but memories seen through someone else's eyes, or something else's understanding. "We see everything, you know." The conductor's voice came from behind her, though she hadn't heard him return. "Every life saved, every life lost, every choice made or not made. Like that night 10 years ago, when you chose to make it a semicolon instead of a period. Through the windows, more scenes began to ripple and swirl. Her father's last day as an EMT, but this time the drunk driver missed his ambulance. Her mother, sharp and present, teaching her grandchildren recipes that in reality she'd long forgotten. Kate herself wearing a wedding ring she'd never owned, working in a private practice with regular hours. Her semicolon tattoo faded, but not gone. Interesting, isn't it? The conductor's voice drifted from somewhere in the car. How many paths branch from a single moment? How many lives spiral out from one choice? Kate clutched her teacup tighter, the warmth anchoring her to what? Reality? These aren't real, she whispered. They're just possibilities. Ah, but what is real, Nurse Sullivan? Is it the exhausted woman who saves strangers while her mother forgets her name? The girl who chose to live when death seemed kinder? Or perhaps... The conductor was suddenly in the seat across from her, his face still pleasant but difficult to focus on. Perhaps it's the Kate who found another way. The visions in the windows shifted again. Kate saw herself at her father's bedside, not as he was when he died, alone in a crashed ambulance, but peaceful, surrounded by family. She saw her mother, her mind sharp and clear thanks to a treatment that in this reality had never been discovered. "Stop it," Kate said, but her voice trembled. "You can't change the past." "Can't I?" The conductor's smile widened slightly. "Car 13 has many destinations, Nurse Sullivan. Many stops along the way. The question is..." He leaned forward, his eyes suddenly very clear and very dark. "Where do you want to get off?" Through the windows now, Kate saw her mother's nursing home, but different. Her mother sat in a sunlit room, alert and smiling, working on a crossword puzzle. No confusion in her eyes, no desperate searching for a husband long gone, just peace. "Your mother was quite the puzzler, wasn't she?" The conductor mused, his reflection in the window overlapping with the scene. "Before the disease took that too. Such a cruel thing, watching someone lose themselves piece by piece." "Was?" Kate's voice caught. She's still... Forgive me. Tenses can be so tricky when you see all times at once." He gestured to the window. "But this could be her now. The treatment exists, you see, in another branch of time. Another choice made by another doctor in another moment." Kate pressed her hand against the glass. Her mother looked up as if she could see her and smiled that old smile, the one that had vanished years ago. "And what's the price?" Kate asked, her voice hollow. "There's always a price." "Is there?" The conductor's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Or is that just what people tell themselves to avoid making difficult choices, to justify staying in their familiar pain rather than reaching for something better?" The train swayed gently and the scene changed. Kate saw herself in an office, not an ER, wearing a wedding ring, family photos on the desk, regular hours, no blood, no trauma. Her semicolon tattoo was still there but faded like a memory of a different life. "Your father had a choice too, you know," the conductor said softly. "That last night. He didn't need to work that extra shift. Could have let someone else take that call. But he chose duty over safety, over family, over you." Kate's fingers tightened around the teacup, her knuckles white. "My father was a hero. He saved people." "And who saves the heroes, Nurse Sullivan?" The conductor's voice was gentle, almost kind. "Who saves the ones who spend their lives saving others? Look again." The windows rippled once more. Kate saw herself at the nurse's station laughing with Jenny. But as she watched, the image shifted, the same scene playing out again and again, different nights, different traumas, different faces. Always another crisis, another life hanging in the balance, another piece of herself left behind in the trauma bay. "There is always a young man," Kate whispered, echoing the conductor's words. "There's always someone else who needs saving." "Yes," the conductor nodded. "And there always will be. The question is, must you be the one to save them all?" The train slowed, though Kate hadn't felt it moving. Through the windows now she saw a station platform, but not like any in the city. It was bright, clean, peaceful. Her mother stood there, looking as she had before the disease, next to her father in his EMT uniform. They were smiling, waving, waiting. "This is your stop," the conductor said quietly. "If you want it to be." Kate stared at her parents through the window, her heart aching. Her father looked exactly as she remembered him. Strong, confident, the way he was before that final night. Her mother's eyes were clear, no trace of the confusion that now clouded them. "They're not real," Kate whispered, but her hand moved toward the window anyway. "Aren't they?" The conductor's reflection appeared beside her parents. "They're as real as any memory, any moment. As real as the life you could have, if you choose it." Kate's semicolon tattoo began to itch, a burning sensation that spread up her arm. She looked down to see it shifting, the ink rippling under her skin like living darkness. "And what about my patient?" she asked, forcing herself to turn away from the window. "What happens to them in this other life?" "There will always be other nurses, other doctors." The conductor spread his hands. "The world turns, with or without us. Perhaps someone else makes different choices, saves different lives. Or perhaps," his smile took on a knowing edge, "perhaps someone else needs their own semicolon moment." The train shuddered slightly, and through the windows, Kate caught a glimpse of the ER. She saw Jenny working on a patient, the same young gang member from tonight. But in this version, without Kate there, the outcome was different. The monitor showed a flat line, Jenny's face etched with defeat. "No," Kate said, the word barely audible. She pressed her hand against the window, watching Jenny try to save the boy. Her fingertips left marks in the condensation like tears on glass. That's not how it works. You can't just swap one person's pain for another's." The conductor tilted his head, that pleasant smile never wavering. "Can't you? Isn't that what triage is, Nurse Sullivan? Choosing who lives and who dies? Who gets help first? Who waits?" "That's different," Kate said, but her voice shook. "We make those choices to save as many as we can, not to make things easier for ourselves." "And yet here you are on car 13, the conductor mused, "seeking something. An escape, perhaps. A different path." He gestured to her parents, still waiting on that alternate platform. "They could be yours again. All of them. The ones you've lost, the ones you're losing. No more night shifts, no more trauma. No more watching your mother fade away, day by day." Her semicolon tattoo burned hotter, the ink writhing beneath her skin. She looked down at it, remembering that night 10 years ago. Remembering Dr. Lee finding her, saving her. Remembering the promise she'd made to herself, to live, to help others live, to turn periods into semicolons. "You're right," Kate said softly, still watching Jenny through the window. "There will always be other doctors, other nurses. There will always be someone else to save them." She turned to face the conductor, her voice growing stronger. "But that's exactly why I can't get off here." The conductor's pleasant expression flickered just for a moment. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Kate touched her semicolon tattoo, feeling its familiar texture beneath her fingers. 10 years ago, someone chose to save me. Dr. Lee could have gone home, could have let someone else handle the suicidal nurse, but he stayed. He fought for me, and because he did..." She gestured to the window where the young gang member's monitor still showed a flat line. "I was there tonight to fight for him." Through the windows, the images began to shift again. Not just possible futures now, but the past. Dr. Lee staying late that night, talking to her until dawn, Jenny covering her shifts when her father died. Her mother, even through the fog of Alzheimer's, still lighting up when Kate visited. "We're all just semicolons," Kate said, standing. "All of us, pausing but continuing, carrying each other through the dark parts of the story. If I get off here, if I choose the easier path, I'm turning someone else's semicolon into a period." The conductor stood as well, his form seeming less substantial now. "And your parents? Your mother? You would choose strangers over them?" Kate looked at her parents through the window one last time, her heart aching. "I'm not choosing strangers over them. I'm choosing to be their daughter, the one they raised to help others, to be strong, To do what's right even when it hurts. Her voice caught. Even when it breaks your heart. The conductor's pleasant mask slipped further, his features becoming more fluid, less human. You could have peace, Kate Sullivan. Rest. No more pain. No, Kate said, her voice steady now. I could have numbness, there's a difference. She held up her wrist, the semicolon tattoo now burning like a star. Peace isn't about escaping the pain. It's about finding meaning in it. Then you choose to suffer? The conductor's voice echoed strangely, as if coming from very far away. To watch your mother fade? To lose more patience? To carry all that weight? Kate smiled, a small, sad smile. I choose to live. All of it. The pain, the joy, the losses, the saves. That's what the semicolon means. Not an ending, not an escape. A continuation. The train shuddered violently. Through the windows, the visions began to fracture, showing glimpses of other passengers, other choices, some taking the conductor's offer, others refusing. The golden light flickered, shadows creeping in at the edges. The warm leather seat beneath her grew cold, then dissolved entirely as Kate blinked and found herself standing on the subway platform. The first train of the morning rumbled into the station, a normal train with harsh fluorescent lights and plastic seats. As Kate boarded, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. For just a moment, she thought she saw a golden light in the tunnel behind her, heard the distant whistle of a different train. Her phone buzzed, a text from the health aide. Your mom's asking for you. She's having a good morning. Remembered your father's favorite song. Kate felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling. She typed back, on my way. Tell her I love her. She didn't look back. She had 3 days off ahead of her, time to sleep, to visit her mother, to remember why she chose this path. There would always be another young man to save, another life hanging in the balance. But for now, she needed to care for herself. After all, you couldn't be a semicolon in someone else's story if you let your own story end. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between easy and right. The world offers us countless escapes, ways to avoid our pain, dodge our responsibilities, take an easier path. And sometimes in our darkest moments, those offers can seem beyond tempting. But true strength isn't found in avoiding the hard parts of our story. It's found in choosing to stay, to continue, to fight, not just for ourselves, but for all the others whose stories intersect with ours. Every time we choose to carry on despite the weight, we become a living semicolon in someone else's narrative, a reminder that their story doesn't have to end here either. We are all connected by these moments of choice, to stay or go, to fight or flee, to help or turn away. And while we can't save everyone, can't carry every burden, can't heal every wound, we can choose to remain present in our own story. Because sometimes just by continuing our own journey, we light the way for others to find their path through the darkness. Remember, it's not about having the strength to never falter, it's about having the courage to keep going, even when the path ahead seems impossible. After all, every semicolon is both an ending and a beginning, a pause, not a period, in life's continuing story.